Good evening, KLRN Radio, friends and family. It is another Saturday night. It is another Front Porch Forensics podcast episode. So here we go. Front Porch Forensics deals with the darkest corners of human nature. This show contains graphic discussions of murder, violence, and the brokenness of the human soul. Listener discretion is strongly advised. But if you choose to stay, well, family, pull up a chair on our front porch, but no, it gets real dark here real fast.
I listen to a lot of true crime. I listen to it at night. I like the girl talk. It makes me feel alright. I like scary stories in the morning. And I like them at night. I like the girl talk vibes. They make me feel just fine. I listen to a lot of true crime.
Hello and welcome to KLRNradio.com, friends and family. Thanks for joining me here on the Front Porch Forensics. I am Bumpstock Ken, your host for the evening. A plague has befallen the Bumpstock compound. The tiny tyrant and Bumpstock Barbie are both stricken with this illness and are, for the time being, under the weather. I myself, I'm not doing all that great, but I wanted to make sure we had a show for you tonight. So here we go, and I hope I do us justice. So tonight, I'm sitting on the front porch with my coffee and my cigar, enjoying the wonderful fall mountain weather. I'm so happy you're here, so pull up a rocking chair and set a spell with me. Tonight, I'm talking about a man called Pee Wee, and don't let the name fool you. This is not a sideshow dwarf or some weird guy in a gray suit and a red bow tie looking for his bicycle at the Alamo. No, this ain't the guy that's got a cinematography fetish, if you remember. No, despite the name Pee Wee was labeled with, he also had another label called the meanest man in America. And you're about to find out for good reason. He, Donald Henry Gaskins, yeah, his story crawls out of the swamps of South Carolina. It is soaked in heartache, hate, and blood. If the devil himself walked barefoot through the backwoods, he'd look just like Pee Wee Gaskins. And what makes this one even more twisted is that Pee Wee's violence, well, it doesn't even end when they catch him and lock him up. He continues his evil ways. And we're not just talking about a killer on the back roads either. We're talking about a man who went to great lengths to kill. Most of the people we see and we do on our show is a lot of kills for convenience. And that's still the case here too. But this guy, even when he wasn't out hunting normally, he was still out hunting, if you know what I mean. So hopefully we'll step back and we'll enjoy this show. Now, to be completely transparent, the story of Pee Wee Gaskins is a mix of court documents, historical records, college papers that were written about him, some witness statements, Gaskins' own family, and then Pee Wee Gaskins himself. And to be honest, it's hard to tell what is true and what's not sometimes. Pee Wee was a well known braggart and a pathological liar. So this show is a mix of all the information that we were able to find that seemed to be the most reliable. So we're going to start on March 13th, 1933, in Florence County, South Carolina. Donald Henry Parrott came into the world. He was a small baby, less than 5 pounds, and he seemed to stay that way up till death. In elementary school, Donald was given the name Pee Wee because of his small size, and that nickname, well, it became fitting because Pee Wee stayed small, stunted, if you will. He never stretched past 5'2", though some reports say 5'4". He carried that insult like a stone in his gut all the way into adulthood. It's like the little man syndrome, I guess. Him trying to prove that he was more, that he was something to be trifled with, or somebody not to be trifled with. That he was um, strong and you know somebody to be feared. So sorry, I'm getting texts and stuff and people chatting. By the way, the chat's open if y'all want to chat. Go right ahead. Um, so I skipped ahead somehow. So like I was saying, Pee Wee was born and he stayed small throughout. 5'2" to 5'4", depending on which one you looked at. Either way, for a grown man, that's pretty small and below below the average, I should say. And he hated that image that made him look weak. Now, again, this was the 1930s. Actually, it was 1933, and we know that is um, the Great Depression, the end of the towards the end of the Great Depression. But it was commonly known as the worst year of the Depression too. People had been suffering for years and didn't really seem to be getting any better. Uh, Everybody was still struggling, and just I mean to say the least, they were struggling. Unemployment in that area was over 25%. In the areas that he was in, these real rural areas, they were hit pretty hard as well. The numbers there are kind of hard to tell because most of the people were self-employed. Um, so the numbers are hard, but national average for South Carolina around that time was 25%. So folks did what they had to do to survive, just like all of us have to do. But Pee Wee's mother, Eulia Molly Parrott, was no different. She traded and sold the one thing that she had, and I'm pretty sure we all know what that is. And she sold it well, apparently. When Eulia met Henry McLaurin Gaskins, that's Pee Wee's biological father, it was merely a business transaction. Reportedly, by family members, Gaskin paid Eulia $1 a week to have sex on a regular weekly meetup. Usually once a week, sometimes twice a week. Well, eventually, Eula became pregnant. So Henry moved Eula into a small house that was near him and began paying her $10 a month because he thought or he knew the baby was his or assumed the baby was his. And that's roughly about $250 in today's money. So $250 for a stretch over a whole month is not enough. So Eulia continued to see other men, and she bounced from man to man. Pee Wee's childhood wasn't filled with lullabies and laughter. It was filled with pain and confusion and fear and shame. There was a constant m- rotation of men in and out of her life, of Pee Wee's life, and they was all abusive. None of them were good men. They were there for one thing, and Pee Wee got in the way of it. But Eula was extremely neglected as well. She was no mother of the year. She did what she had to do to survive, but in spite of Pee Wee, not for Pee Wee. To say that he was neglected is a massive understatement. while unattended, which was the norm. At less than 2 years old, some reports say he was 14 months, some say 18 months. It's hard to tell, but around 2 years old, a little less. Pee Wee drank a bottle of kerosene. Back then, bottle the kerosene came in these like kind of like a milk jug type glass bottle. He drank it all, and he suffered horribly and was tormented for years with crippling convulsions and just pain in the intestines and horrible headaches because of that. And they said up to almost 4 years old, he had these spells on a regular basis. And because of this, it's thought that Yulia lost what little motherly instincts and interest in Pee Wee that she had due to his crying and his suffering and for so many years. As he grew and as was old enough to pay attention, as it were, he would be locked outside while mom worked. Um, but those were actually, to come to find out, those would be the good moments. Sometimes he would bear witness to her in action to say, it's reported in the beginning that he would try to stop the men, and he would receive kicks and even fists. One report says that the man grabbed him by his foot, and threw him across the room and bounced him off the wall. So that's the reward he got for his effort trying to save his mom. And Pee Wee received abuse of all kinds from the revolving door of men that was in his life due to his mom's work. And some reports, Pee Wee said it, then he recanted, but he said again that sometimes he would be sold to um, some of the men coming in and out. So after 10 years of this, Yulia gets married to a man named Hinton Hanna. It's not really known what happened to the original suitor that was paying her $10 a month or $10 a week. He just kind of fades out of the story. I'm assuming since he's not the only John anymore, that he got out of there. That's what I would assume. Again, I'm not sure, but it makes sense to me. Um, so one would think that it would be a welcome change. You know, Mr. Hanna had children of his own, so now Pee Wee was thrown into a whole new family dynamic. But old Hennett, he might have been the worst of all of the men to come around. The physical abuse escalated to a daily happening, almost out of I don't know, out of fun, really. And the mental abuse increased, and the sexual perversion skyrocketed because apparently Hennett and Eula did not seek out privacy for their escapades. They seemed to welcome all the children to sit and watch. I reckon they had an audience fetish. What is that called? Not voyeurism. That's where they watch, but whatever. They had that. So it's pretty clear where this trauma comes from. That I mean, I actually feel sorry for the kid because can you imagine how damaged his psyche would be from all that? It scrambles impulses. I'm sorry, I got a text or one of the chats. Yes, the chat's open. Please go ahead. I'm trying to watch it, but I'll fail. So I know we got a few people over watching on Facebook. Hey, Michelle, and glad you're here. Exhibitionism. Thank you. The bump stock Barbie is in the chat right now. She is, like I said earlier, she's ill, so she's not helping host, but she is in the chat room. So y'all hop on there and enjoy that. So we all know all the early markers: abuse, neglect, head injuries, the bedwetting, cruelty to animals. Pee Wee had all this. Uh, the head injury is actually a brain trauma because of the convulsions and due to the kerosene ingestion. Uh, it would basically attack his brain, and that's where those traumas come from there. So it's not like necessarily a concussion type event, although he had many of those just from the physical abuse. And he suffered greatly. So there's is a lot of trauma on top of the trauma that's already in the from the kerosene. So Pee Wee had all of the markers. We know that he tortured animals, according to friends and families and people of the community. Uh, and as early as kindergarten, he was killing all kinds of small animals, mice, rabbits, people's cats. I mean, he there was nothing that wasn't a target for him. It doesn't say necessarily if he progressed on past that as far as animals go, but one would assume he probably did. Um, he suffered multiple head traumas from the beatings and falls from the physical assaults. His mother later in life reports he went to bed and had terrible nightmares and would set things on fire for fun. So we see the McDonald triad at a very young age already: the bedwetting, the animal cruelties, the fire setting. So it's a textbook at this point of building a monster. Well, again, remember this: he's still young as all this is happening. That those very important years for his development when all this is happening. So when he when Pee Wee gets to age 11, he quits school, which that time in that area wasn't that uncommon. And he had an interest in mechanics, working on cars and things, because um, that's a lot of the way you fix your own stuff, right? And it turns out they had a natural ability to do that. He quickly made a name for himself in the area as a reliable mechanic, even at that young age. And we're talking 11, 12, 13, working at this mechanics shop, and he was actually working on the cars on his own. That's how well he was, and people trusted him to do it. Well, pretty soon he was making pretty decent money for the time. He was actually making more money than Hennett was, and Hennett wasn't happy about that. So of course he confiscated any money that would come up to pay for his living. And of course he'd beat him, and the jealousies and stuff like that come away. So Pee Wee decided he needed to come up with money that couldn't be taken away from him, that couldn't be tracked as easy. So Pee Wee falls in with two other boys that work at the mechanic shop. They're about his age. Um, again, around 13 years old. Danny Smith and Henry Marsh. Now, the Smith last name, I'm not sure about. Um, that's what Pee Wee called him later in life when he was in prison. In an interview, he said, "Yeah, his last name was Smith," but there's no real record of that. No official record of that. Just what Pee Wee said. But we're gonna say Danny Smith. Henry Marsh, there is record of, so we know his last name. The three formed a gang calling themselves the Trouble Trio. And what started off as just knocking over sheds and breaking windows and some other petty vandalism, and kind of moved into some small burglary, uh, harassments, things like that. It quickly escalated with Pee Wee as their leader. And then they moved into uh, burning barns and stealing cars and straight up muggings. And eventually it gets much, much worse. They started raping other boys, and they was taking turns like it was some sort of sport. Um, and by the age of, again, we're talking about 13 here, Pee Wee was already swimming in a swamp full of violence. the step too far, because it always gets too far at some point, is when the boys. Now, let me back up. They were raping other boys about their ages, and they was getting away with it because the other kids, they didn't want to talk about it, and they threatened to make it worse or to beat them up or even kill them if they did talk about it. So the boys kept quiet. Well, they take it a step too far. They finally push that envelope over the edge, if you will, and they assault Henry Marsh's own sister. They rape her. Each of them take turns, even Henry, the brother. And after the Trouble Trio crossed that line, they immediately began to dissolve. I don't know if Marsh was having some conflicting issues or feelings that was beginning to cause issues, but strife was beginning to happen inside the trio. Well, eventually, little sister did not. Little sister did not stay quiet, unlike the other boys were, and she tells her parents what happened. All right, we got things. So she tells her parents what's happening and about the assault. And boy, she spoke up and she made herself heard about it. Now, when the parents found out, they also took matters into their own hands. So the boys were taken into a barn. They were strung up by their wrists and beaten severely, almost to death, it was said in interviews by relatives years later during the trial and during the jail sentences. So after the beatings, Danny and Henry's families, um, they left the area. They packed up and moved away. I guess from the shame of it, from like I said, the small town justice, because they didn't go to the police, but still that damage, that trauma, they just up and left. They left completely. But now Pee Wee, with no other places to go, he stayed there in the area and continued his reign of terror on his on all on his own. And boy, I'm telling you, it does escalate quickly. With no one there to keep him in check, he goes off the rails. He's becoming more bold in his crimes, stealing cars for the local underground chop shops, um, doing the smash and grabs at grocery stores, all that kind of things. And but his crime he liked best was burglary, breaking and entering into people's homes. They was quick, they was easy, they was intimate. He felt that he had some control and power over the people because he was able to go through all their things at his leisure. Well, one night he targeted hit too close to home and robbed the home of his own cousin. Now, the cousin wasn't much older than him, and she caught him red-handed and held him at bay with a hatchet. But Pee Wee strikes anyways, and she did get a glancing blow on him, but he was able to take the hatchet and begin his attack. And he intended to kill her. He struck her several times, and finally he struck her in the head, and what she thought was a killing blow. And Pee Wee drags her body over to the side of the yard and drops it in a ditch, leaving her for dead. Well, she survives and bore witness against Donald Pee Wee Gaskins, and that got him sent to industrial school for boys in South Carolina, like a reform school. We would call it juvenile, you know, juvenile jail, whatever it's called here. You know what I'm talking about. Jail for kids under 18. Well, for Pee Wee, it was no reform school at all. It was a slaughterhouse. Because of his size, he immediately became a target for the bigger boys who raped him and beat him and broke him down. Um, daily. Now, the boss boy, as he was called, offered Pee Wee protection in exchange for nightly sexual favors, sometimes multiple times a day, according to Pee Wee. And the boss boy took possession of him, even sleeping in the same bed with him, or Pee Wee sleeping in his bed with him, I should say. So the boss boy owned Pee Wee at this point. But the boss would still loan Pee Wee out on a regular basis to the other boys. So even doing what he had to do to be protected, he was still just being used again. Um, so Pee Wee, he was pretty crafty. So he would escape, he would run away over and over again and again. But every single time he got drugged back, and his complaints fell on deaf ears. The people in charge didn't believe him or just didn't care. And he'd be put right back in the same place with those same boys. At one point, he does escape, and he finds a girl who is like 13 years old. I think Pee Wee is 17 at this point, and he actually marries her while he's on the outside from this reform school. And he tries to go straight, but from pressure from her, and she finds out that he was in reform school for some of the things he did. He didn't tell her everything, and she convinces him the only way to go straight and to make this marriage work is for him to go back to the reform school and finish out his time there until he turned 18, and then he could come back out. They could be together. So Pee Wee does that. He goes back on his own to reform school and turns himself in and finishes out his sentence till he's 18. Well, the place taught him one lesson. The only way to survive the pack mentality was to become meaner than the wolves. So Pee Wee said that his time gave him the fuel he needed to become stronger, to control and have power over others. This reform school took a monster and created a demon. The head of the school wrote to the state before Pee Wee's 18th birthday and subsequent, his release date, that he was, quote, the paranoid type and shows, quote, homicidal tendencies. And he encouraged the state to move Pee Wee into the state penitentiary as opposed to being released to the street. However, since there was no official diagnosis on Gaskins made while he was in the reform school, that the state went ahead and upheld their agreement and released him onto the street back into the public upon his 18th birthday. So by 1953, Pee Wee was out doing what he knew to do best. Between the times that he was out of reform school throughout his life, he was on again, off again, married, and he did have children. I'll mention his daughter later, not by name, but I'll mention some quotes from him later because it's just amazing to me. So on YouTube, you can look up Pee Wee Gaskins, and there's a bunch of videos and interviews and documentaries about him. Check some of these out because one of them, and I didn't clip it, and I should have. They interview his daughter pretty heavily. She's the main interviewee, and the way she talks about Pee Wee, it's like she's proud almost. It's kind of disturbing a little bit to watch that. Um, I've got some of her quotes later on, and I'll bring it up. But man, she says at one point that I know that he did all these awful things, but he's still my daddy, and him being my daddy's never going to change. So how happy she was that she loves him and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, at some point, a monster's a monster. You know, it's just hard for me to wrap my mind around where she's coming from in these interviews because I tell you, it is to me pretty disturbing to watch. Again, just go on YouTube, search up documentaries on Pee Wee Gaskins, you'll find it. It's pretty easy to see. But by the time 1953 rolls around, Pee Wee was out doing what he knew how to do best. He was drifting around, breaking into houses again. And one night, he got caught by a girl, and I don't have her name. I couldn't find it. But instead of running away like he had been, he was caught. He was cornered. So he attacked her with a hammer that he had been using. And he hit her in the skull, and it cracked it open bad. Um, when the doctors found her, they said it's a wonder she lived through it. But she did live, but just barely. Now, that attack put Pee Wee behind bars in real prison for 6 years. His first real stint in an actual prison, a grown up prison. Well, his crimes are growing, but we know he wasn't growing any. In prison, small men were prey, and Pee Wee was brutalized. But he decided he wasn't going to stay prey for long because he remembered what happened to him in the days of the reform school, and he wasn't about to go do that again. So he stabbed and killed the biggest inmate that had been raping him. And that murder changed his reputation. Suddenly, Pee Wee wasn't a victim anymore. He was the predator. He learned that blood brought you respect. And that was the seed that grew into the man we'll see later. Killing to survive, killing to dominate, and killing to prove that he wasn't small, that he was a big man after all. So when Pee Wee got out of jail in 1961, the murder in that prison he got away with because nobody saw anything. And so he does his time, and he gets out of prison in 1961, and he claimed that the highway was calling to him, that was something that he couldn't get out of his blood. So he said that to feed the beast that was in him, he would pick up hitchhikers. It didn't matter. It'd be both boys, girls, young, old. It did not matter. He preferred the younger ones just because he was a sick bastard. But he said to do that, the reason he would do that is that the pressure in his gut would build until he just had to kill. And he called it relieving the pressure. He'd rape, he'd torture, he'd mutilate. Then he'd dump the bodies in the swamps of South Carolina. He bragged about more than 80 killings done in that manner, about just picking up random hitchhikers, having his way with them, and then dumping the bodies in the swamps. Now, almost none of these are confirmed. Remember, Gaskins is a braggart and a liar, but a lot of these are not confirmed. No bodies, no names. However, the stories do match patterns of missing persons in the Carolinas during that time frame. Now, he may have inflated the number, but there's little doubt that some of it was true and that he was behind many of those killings. By 1970, Pee Wee turned meaner still. It wasn't just killing strangers on the highway. He started killing people that he knew. Uh, Starting with Peggy Cutno, just 13 years old, Martha Ann Dix, poisoned with arsenic. Then he killed by drowning Doreen Dempsey and her baby girl, 2-year-old Robin. Now, at the beginning of this show, we played the warning about it being rough. Well, it's about to get rough. Pee Wee raped both mother and child. He is quoted by his own daughter. Again, this is in that documentary I was watching. It said that, this is the quote, Daddy said he had to rape that baby. He just had to do it. And that the baby was mixed race, and that just didn't sit well with Daddy. You see, Doreen, what's her name, Doreen? Yeah. She had a relationship with a black man and got pregnant from it. kept the child, the baby, Robin. And, you know, racist old Pee Wee, he just couldn't have that. So he killed them both and had his way with the bodies. And then he just buried them, dumped them. The burial sites also tells a tale about some of the things that he was doing. Shallow graves on his own property where bones were just tangled like roots. Forensics teams unearthed bodies Pee Wee had dumped like trash. Each recovery confirmed his crimes weren't just ghost stories. Surprisingly, Gaskins, he didn't even, I mean, he did very, very little to hide his murders. I mean, he would even brag about, or all about town, that he had, get this, his own personal graveyard. He even drove a old hearse car around, and that was his. Here's a picture of it. He drove an old hearse around, and that was his mode of transportation. On the back of the hearse, he had made a sign, a hand painted sign that says, "I kill people," in big, bold letters. I mean, he was so blunt about it that, people, they wrote it off as crazy old Pee Wee. I mean, because how many people are just so open about something like that? It says, in 1973, serial killer Pee Wee Gaskins bought an old hearse and told his friends that he needed it to haul the dead bodies of people that he had killed. And no one knew he wasn't kidding. Because, I mean, any sane person would hear that and think, oh, there's just no way. That's just ridiculous. That's just somebody, you know, being an idiot. Um, Bump Stock Barbie here says many serial killers in history have talked about the need to kill being a compulsion, and it builds up and builds up in their mind, and they need to relieve that pressure, like you said earlier. And yeah, so he definitely did need that recognition. It goes to his need to feel like the big man. He thinks fear and respect are the same things. So that was probably why he bragged so much and even drove that car around him. He was telling people what he was doing. And again, the normal mind can't wrap around that as something true. That's just somebody being crazy. Now, no one liked Pee Wee, the guy, but a killer who openly admitted to it. I mean, again, that's just something that no one would do. So, I mean, Gaskin was able to hide in plain sight by doing this. Now, time's marching on. Pee Wee's getting away with murder. He's bragging about it. Nothing's happening until it finally starts. The trap finally starts springing together, if you will. It finally starts catching up to him, and Gaskins was hired to murder a man named Silas Yates. Yates' ex-girlfriend Diane Neely and her boyfriend Avery Howard heard of this murder and decided to blackmail Gaskins for $5,000. They threatened to expose not only the murder, but Gaskins' assault on the teen girl as well. Unbeknownst to them, Diana's husband, Walter Neely, had worked with Gaskins before. He was actually working with Gaskins to steal cars and whatnot. Now, you heard that right. Diane Neely and her boyfriend, Avery Howard, and her husband, Walter Neely. So there's a triangle going on there already. I'm assuming they were separated. I don't know. But she knew that Walter had a uh, relationship with Pee Wee. They would steal cars together mainly and sell them to the chop shops, all that kind of stuff. And he had done several jobs with him, Walter had, but this is the first time that Pee Wee had asked him to bury a body. Um, Pee Wee himself was actually going to use this to blackmail Walter to keep him from ever turning on him, because this way he was an accessory to murder. And the tie-in with Yates to Gaskins through the Neelys, it's just something that's pretty crazy to me. It's just a web that was weaving in the dark side, the dark corners of the darkest rooms, but it was a web weaving together that ultimately catches him. Now, excuse me, Gaskins, he wasn't going to play any games about being blackmailed. So instead of paying the blackmail, uh, Gaskins lures Diana and Avery out to a meeting spot. He had told them he was going to pay them to get them out there, but instead he murdered both of them. He then enlisted Walter Neely's help to bury their bodies as well. So Walter, out of whatever reasoning, he winds up going along with it. He helps him bury the bodies of his ex-wife and all that too. Uh, Ex-wife and new boyfriend, I guess, or not even ex-wife, just estranged wife and new boyfriend. He helps Pee Wee bury them also. Now he Walter was not the leader in any way. He was definitely a follower. He didn't have the cunning, if you will. I won't say smarts, but the cunning. Well, Walter later gets arrested for an unrelated auto theft scheme. He went out on his own and was doing some side work, and he winds up getting arrested, pulled over. Well, during this arrest and then questioning, he winds up getting panicked and under pressure from the police, and he starts revealing the plans that are the work that he and Pee Wee were doing, stealing cars as well, and it just kind of snowballs, and he winds up revealing everything that he knew to the police, including where Gaskins had buried multiple bodies. So now we got Walter panicked. The police have him arrested and threatening him with jail time. They find out about Pee Wee's murders and Walter's involvement in burying the bodies. So to save his own neck, Walter decides he's going to do a plea deal, a bargain with the police, and he's going to show them everything. He's going to take them to the bodies where he buried Yates and Avery Howard and Diana Neely, and also reported burial sites, mass graves on Pee Wee's property that Henry knew about, or Walter knew about. And he does. He takes them and shows them. And based on Neely's information, police discovered the remains of 8 victims near Gaskins' home in Prospect, South Carolina. They were all buried in shallow graves, spread about. Uh, some of them multiple on top of each other. Some only was partially in you know partial skeletons in the graves. There was no kind of protection to them. They were in several different states of decay and just literally tossed like trash into these holes and covered up. Now, Pee Wee confessed to those murders, and he bragged about many, many others. In court, he wore that same smirk that we come to see him in. Here's this mug shot. You see what I'm talking about? Again, he wasn't a very big guy, but he gets arrested. He gets, what's the word? Finally, he gets put on the stage where he can talk about how big he is and how important he is. So that's what he does. He starts in his confessions with the police talking about all kinds of things, all kinds of murders, all kinds of people, the amount of killings. You know, he said that they were um, multiple ones everywhere. I mean, he said that they were up to 80. Um, he said that his goal was to hit 100. And according to his daughter, the number is 105. I don't know if he ever made it or not, or again, if it was this big man or little man syndrome. But either way, in court, he wore that same smirk. This is a small man, but meaner than hell. And he was sentenced to death. Now, it was Gaskins' time to make a deal and offer to lead police to the other graves in exchange for a life without parole, which he tried to do. And he did shake them out and show them his burial sites, showed them other places where people were buried. He couldn't remember names, but he did get most of the locations right. And it really just delayed the inevitable because even with all the information he was giving them, the courts did not give him life without parole. They kept the death penalty. But unfortunately, or I guess you could say, fortunately, in his case, uh, South Carolina later on changed their stance on the death penalty, and he went back. He wound up getting life without parole, anyways. So much to the chagrin of the law enforcement, the deal that he wanted, he winds up getting anyways. So, needless to say, though, prison didn't tame him at all. If anything, it gave him a playground uh, to practice his skill set. Hmm. Pee Wee, so his reputation this time around was much better because he built off what he had done in his previous prison stint about being a predator instead of prey this time. Got a little bit of weight to him, no pun intended. But Pee Wee went to work there. He smuggled, he hustled, he made threats, he made deals, and he was running his corner of the prison pretty effectively. He was living a pretty decent life in prison this time around, especially compared to what he was dealing with earlier. Uh, the rapes weren't happening. The the beatings weren't bad. He had some muscle that worked with him because of his reputation of being a stone cold killer. And I keep saying little man syndrome because I think that's the easiest way to explain it. Because he had a short fuse. The fuse was shorter than he was, and when he spoke about it, he didn't just warn you. He didn't just threaten you. He went through with what he said he was going to do. So that reputation actually gained him a lot of notoriety and some protection through fear in prison. Now, at one point, he one of the things he was known to do was would smuggle weapons into the prison and give them out to people so that they could uh, do some murders and clean house, if you will, do the dirty work for him. And so there's no telling how many murders he was able to do in prison just through that. Um, you know, facilitating the means to that end by supplying the weapons or the tools needed to get the job done. So he had that reputation as well, that he wasn't alone in prison, that he had others that was following him that would do the work for him too. Again, just building on his reputation and making him bolder and more willing to do whatever he wanted to do. Because up to this point, no one was stopping him. He was able to, insert his will on anyone and everyone at any time. He had guards that were paid off. He had people in the cafeterias that would take care of him. Um, the things he couldn't do physically, he wound up manipulating people enough that he could control them in other ways and make himself better in other ways. And by all rights, he was still doing good. Now, it wasn't an easy road. He still had to work. He still had to prove himself on a regular basis while in prison. And one of these things is what may be one of the most in awe-inspiring murders, I guess, in a prison setting. Now, you see all these movies about these fantastical ways of dealing death, um, and most of them are over the top crazy, and you're like, yeah, that's Hollywood, of course, nothing like that would ever happen. But I'm telling you, Pee Wee, real life could be a movie, and what he does here in prison, I think, if they haven't made a movie about him yet, they should. Um, so Rudolph Tyner. Tyner was killed. Tyner had killed an elderly couple, and that's what he was in prison for two life sentences. So Pee Wee was hired from an outside contract to silence him. So Pee Wee befriended him and gained his trust. What's amazing is that they had access to telephones. Of course, they did. They prisoners do now. They did back then too. They're all recorded. They're supposed to be monitored. But he was having, and it's recorded. It's in some of those videos I watched. He had open conversations with his contact, the person that had hired him to kill Tyner, just openly talking about how he was going to do it and how it was progressing, if he was having trouble or what his success rate was. And this contact through the paid off guards would get him the tools he needed to get the job done, like I said. And it started off with poisoning. Gaskin had tried to poison Tyner first and then multiple times afterwards, um, but never could quite get it right. Tyner would only fall ill. He would complain of headaches. He would go to the nurse's station, the infirmary, whatever it's called, and actually get a little vacation from it. Laid up in a hospital bed. He wasn't suffering the way Pee Wee thought he should, so he would up the dose and cause the vomiting, stuff like that, so the poisons wouldn't stay in the systems long enough to really get it, to get the job done. But he was growing frustrated with that because he couldn't do it often. He had to do it strategically, or else Tyner might catch on. And it was taking forever, and he was getting pressured from the outside contacts. So Eventually, Pee Wee came up with a new plan. Um, he contacts his person on the outside, tells him, "I've got an idea, but to make it work, I'm gonna need something from you." And there's a radio or a audio recording that I have it somewhere, but I can't find it now, where he was talking on the phone with the contact, saying, "quote How much of a stick of dynamite can you get me in here?" And the guy's like, "Well, I don't know how I would get it in, how we could smuggle that in. Um, how about some C4 putty? That would be easier to get in. I can get you that and the cap. And the cap's what detonates." So we Pee Wee says that'll work. C4 would be even better. Let's do that. So Pee Wee acquired a set of two-way radios, little handheld radios, like a walkie-talkie kind of, a little bit smaller. Again, through the guard, he got them, and his plan was to talk to his buddy Tyner after hours, right? So, with his over the course of time, with his contacts inside the prison, he was able to have his cell moved, or I should say, he moved into a cell that was right next door to Tyner's. They had no window, but they shared a wall side by side. And he gave Tyner the radio rigged with the C4. Now, Pee Wee had taken this radio apart, put C4 in the earpiece, wired up the cap to it, and had it wired up trigger wise. So when Tyner hit the button to talk through the battery, the power of the battery would set that cap off. That's how it worked. But he convinced Tyner to hold it up to his ear so that they could talk secretly to each other after it lights out. And then, boom, Tyner's head's gone. Blows it clean. I mean, it's bad. Zero chance of survival. I mean, he is graveyard dead. No doubt. Immediate. He's dead. Um, the murder for hire made Pee Wee infamous all over again because they were no way that he could hide this one. He's the only one that had the radios. He's the one that gave Tyner the radio. Everything set in motion was pretty convincingly him. He couldn't pass it on to anybody else. But I mean, think about that though. The man was so mean that he built a bomb on death row. He turned his prison into his killing grounds. It started off on the highways and ended up going to prison, and it still didn't stop him. He just found different ways to kill. Now, Pee Wee was charged and convicted of murder in a very, very short trial. So Gaskins' last sentence that was given, wait, originally was death, and then it was dropped down to uh, life without parole because the state had kind of a soft-hearted governor at the time. They changed things. Well, that didn't last long. The death penalty got put back on the table as an option for the state, but Gaskins had already had his moved to from death down to life without parole, and it just seemed mean to put it back to death penalty after it got reduced. So, unfortunately for him, his life sentence now was drastically shortened because he received the death penalty, which again was back on the table because of this death, this killing of Tyner. So this guy, he's had multiple opportunities. He would kill people openly and easily, bragged about it when he was out in the wild, out in the real world, and people wouldn't believe him. But obviously, he did kill many, many. It's hard to tell how many exactly. And then he gets put in prison, and he doesn't kill people with his own hands. He has the other people do it for him by giving them the tools to do so: shivs, knives, all these razor blades, all these kind of things. And then that's still not enough. He goes above and beyond by adding a bomb into the mix. I mean, that's not something normal. I don't think we've done a show yet where somebody was murdered by a bomb. Maybe it was him, in a way, still trying to overcompensate for his size, um, go bigger and bolder, you know, something along those lines, perhaps. But I tell you, he really, really worked to earn his nickname. On September 6th, 1991, Pee Wee Gaskins walked into the electric chair. No tears, no remorse. He claimed over 100 souls. Again, you see his numbers kept climbing. And his daughter claims that the number is 105. Um, I know Pee Wee had said that his goal was 100. He bragged that he had made it to 80, but the inconsistencies in his stories were so one side. I mean, I'm so back and forth, right? I mean, like a waves on his storytelling. So he couldn't believe anything that he said. Again, just trying to overcompensate, trying to make himself in his mind bigger and badder by upping the numbers. He wanted to be known as the most prolific serial killer ever, and he thought that power and respect came from that fear, and because that's all he knew. Ever since he was a child, that's all he knew. From the early childhood that damaged upon his psyche, all the way up to reform school, which should have been a way for him to reset and maybe get his mind right, but it just got darker again. Everywhere he went, it just reinforced that twisted sense of how to survive. I don't want to sound like I'm taking up for the guy too much because he was a monster. But there's still a part of me that hates his story about about how he grew up and how he became what he became. Nature versus nurture. We know that they were some physical damages from the kerosene and from the multiple beatings, which could have tweaked something, could have set something off. But the nurture part, I don't think the kid had a chance. Um, Everything that he was running into, every turn he went, even the people that were supposed to help him in the reform school, they just ignored him and made it worse. So his daughter, again, claims the number is 105, though the ground only gave up a handful of folks, and he earned a nickname, the meanest man in America, because of it. And for once, the newspapers weren't lying. And here's the truth of it: he was a product of severe mental abuse, physical and emotional neglect. He suffered injuries to his brain at 1 year old to 2 year old. Uh, Plenty of people suffer those things without becoming monsters. Pee Wee's I don't know, maybe he chose cruelty. Maybe he chose domination and control and power because it's the only way he saw to survive. Again, Great Depression era, people did things, horrible things, uh, just to get by, just to survive. And that was the mindset that he was born into. Um, Laura's right, says hurt people. And that's the truth. Rarely do we see it to this level, thankfully, but it still rings true. Pee Wee chose that cruelty and he chose that domination and he chose that meanness because that's all he ever got given to him. In the end, he's a small in body, but his evil stretched far enough to stain the entire state. He was a giant in some manners when it comes to being mean, you know. To see him, his size, his demeanor. Again, he's not big at all. Um, Very unassuming man, and you can tell he spent his entire life trying to make up for that, trying to make sure that people knew he was um, he was a big man, that he was somebody to be feared and respected. In his twisted version of fear of respect. So, I mean, what do we have here? Is it a boy born small and made mean who grew into a killer, so feared he carved his legend in blood? Pee Wee Gaskins, the meanest man in America. It makes you wonder how much of evil is born and how much is made. Either way, once it's loose, it don't go back into the bottle like that. You can't bring it back when it gets to the levels he was getting at. When you take that step, I guess it's the you get a stone rolling downhill, you can't stop it, you know. And every little step he took that elevated his position, that made him feel more, that made him feel like he had some sort of power, that he wasn't this weakling, that he wasn't someone to laugh at, that he was somebody who was a waste of skin, and the way he felt about himself, the way he was made to feel about himself. He began to revel in that. He grew in stature, if you will. Maybe not physically, but that was his only way to rise above. The Napoleon complex. You've heard all this before. Um, I guess it's something that it's hard for me to say this without sounding like I'm making, taking up for him. I can see that brokenness that he was born into. That he was on his own from the very beginning. Really, he had to pick himself up and move forward. And the only examples he had and before him were the worst of the worst. To say the very, very least, the worst of the worst. His mindset on uh, what love is, his mindset of how to treat family, how to treat other people. Uh, when you wanted something, you took it, no matter what it was or who it was from. Um, and no one was there to tell him any different. That's in it. And his mom they don't even. I don't think they knew he existed beyond somebody who was an annoyance or somebody they could use, and it grew into what we have with Donald Pee Wee Gaskins. But again, I don't want to make this too much about him without and making it sound like I feel bad for him, which I do. But the things he did are still unexcusable. You can't uh, you can't sanctify a monster like that, and I'm right on the edge of doing so. I know that, um, but cruel, monstrous, devilish, inexcusable, um, rot in hell level meanness. When he got the name meanest man in America, it was accurate. Uh, he deserves no kind of lifting up. Um, he deserves everything he gets in the end, and that's it. I mean, I'm not afraid to say that. I know it sounds horrible, and that you always want to feel bad or at least try to um, I guess in a way trying to wrap your mind around what they was doing to just understand it a little bit in our own heads of how someone could get to that level, how someone could do the things he was doing and be so bold and so proud of it. And we see this a lot of times in other killers too. We've all talked about it on other shows, and the bottom line is, as long as our minds are mostly right, I don't think we ever will be able to figure it out. Never be able to understand it. So I'm going to stop trying with Pee Wee because I don't want to make him someone that we can feel bad for and to um, humanize anymore. Because these evil creatures, they don't they don't deserve to be humanized. Now, the ones who do are the victims. And Front Porch Forensics always likes to focus on that as what we want you to remember. Now, all of Pee Wee's victims weren't uh, innocents. Some of them been in prison. They weren't the innocent bystander that you normally see that's picked up, victimized, and killed. But still, they were still people that he took out, people that he destroyed, that he ended. And yeah, Laura's saying it's okay to sympathize with them, people who's been abused. You're just not justifying anything he did later, and I'm not. I'm not trying to justify anything. It's it's just again, I just the whole situation about him uh, becoming who he became is just it kills me. It's hard to talk about, and I don't want to make light of anything he did. I don't want to justify anything he did. Um, Definitely don't want to make a hero out of him. But it just sucks. It absolutely blows on all counts. Um, Kid never had a shot, but there's a lot of people out there who don't have a shot growing up, and they don't turn into this. Um, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins. He was put to death in 1991. The world's a better place of it. So I know I'm beginning to ramble here. Normally we do a 2-hour show, but without somebody here with me to bounce ideas off of, it's kind of hard to do. So I'm going to move on into the in memoriam for the victims, to remember the victims and to remind ourselves that the darkness doesn't always look big and scary. Sometimes it hides in someone small, someone overlooked, someone like Pee Wee Gaskins. Again, small in stature, but a monster sized evil streak. Something that I hope never to be seen again. Again, his goal was 100. His daughter says there was 105. He claimed at least 80 hitchhikers alone, plus the other 15 victims that we know about. And so that's 95 from his own counts. Um, Either way, the 15 that we have, or 15 or so that we have that are contributed to him, that are known to be his kills, are just as bad um, as 1 to 100. Either way, a death is a death, a victim is a victim. So I want to move on to the in memoriam. Uh, it's not a super long one, but again, like I said, it's still too long if you ask me. And I'll go ahead and start reading those names out now. You got, first off, Janice Kirby, 15 years old, Gaskins' own niece, whom he beat to death in November of 1970. You got Patrick Ann Alsburg, 17, which is Kirby's friend, who he also beat to death in November of 1970. Martha Ann Clyde Dix, 20 years old, allegedly killed with poison in March of 1971 or 72. Gaskins gave conflicted reasons, and her remains was recently discovered for a proper burial. Matter of fact, they were found June of this past year. Doreen Hope Dempsey, 22 years old, an acquaintance who lived nearby, whom Gaskins drowned in June 1973. Robin Michelle Dempsey, 2 years old, Doreen's young daughter, whom Gaskins also drowned at the same time as the mother. We also know what he did to him. Johnny Sellers, 36, a criminal associate. Gaskins shot in the back of the head in June 1974 to keep him quiet and keep him from becoming an informant. Jessie Ruth Judy, 22, who was Johnny Sellers' girlfriend, stabbed by Gaskins during the same incident. Silas Barnwell Yates, 45, a man Gaskins killed for hire in February of 1975 by slitting his throat. Diana Bellamy Neely, 25, killed by Gaskins on April 10th, 1975, because he threatened to blackmail him and to expose his sexual abuses of teens. Avery Leroy Howard, 34 years old, Diane Bellamy Neely's boyfriend, whom Gaskins also shot along with Diane. Kim Gelkin, 13 years old, stabbed and shot to death by Gaskins in 1975 to prevent her from reporting his sexual abuse. Dennis Bellamy, 27, Diana Bellamy's half-brother, Dennis Bellamy, 27, Diana Bellamy's half brother, shot by Gaskins in October 1975 to prevent him from talking to the police as well. John Henry Knight, 15 years old, Dennis Bellamy's half brother, also shot to death by Gaskins October 1975 at the same incident. And then Rudolph Tyner, 23, a fellow death row inmate, killed via explosive device by Gaskins in 1982 in a murder for hire plot. And that's probably the one that is the most shocking of all. But each one of these deaths, whether they are a quote unquote innocent or someone who danced in the dark as well, it's still a life taken. It's still a life that wasn't Pee Wee's business to take. Um, and these souls are gone. Whether we want to call them good people or bad, that don't matter. Uh, their soul is taken off this earth and sent to the Lord to deal with. And again, Pee Wee had no business doing that, and may he rot in hell for it. So, again, a little bit early show this week. Ending it kind of early. Normally we go till 9, but I don't want to sit here and what's the word, ramble too much, because I don't want to look too much more like an idiot than I already am. I do not think there's a juxtaposition on tonight. I sent a message out just to be sure, because I don't want to cut off early if there is. I don't want to screw those guys over. So, I mean, I can continue to talk if I need to, but I would prefer not to. So, anyways, that does it for this episode as a whole. I want to emphasize that the victims, known and unknown, whether they be these 15 or they be 105, they should be remembered. I mean, that's the way you hear at Front Porch Forensics want to leave off every episode, is focused on the innocent. And in some cases here, not so innocent victims. But like I said, still, victims are the same. They are victims of this piece of shit, Pee Wee Gaskins. And like I said, gone in 1991, the world's a better place for it. Horrible story, unfair childhood, unfair life. Doesn't justify anything that he done. These people, Rudolph Tyner, who was already in prison, his associates who threatened to blackmail him, his associates who were against the law, who were doing illegal things, who doing nefarious things already. Those victims, still, they don't deserve to be taken out like this. It's not his place to do what he did, and he should not be applauded for anything like that. And if we can get Donald Pee Wee Gaskins' name forgotten, and we go back to the only Pee Wee we know of being the one who, you know, got caught having a little too much fun in the movie theater, that weird dude with the acid trip of a house. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Let's make Pee Wee Herman the only Pee Wee we know about. Pee Wee Gaskins can fall into history's trash bucket and float off into the swamps like he throwed those other bodies. I'm fine with that. So, no juxtaposition tonight. This their week off. They'll come back next week. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. And like I said, that does it for this episode. So thank you for sitting with me through this. Um, I hope I did okay. We'll find out. I am Bumpstock Ken. You can find me on X at Bumpstock Ken. Also here on Front Porch Forensics on X is at FP _forensics. You can see it running across the bottom of your screen here. And then also on X at KLRN Radio on X. You can find the rest of our episodes pretty much every podcast catcher out there. Spreaker, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, all those. Just look us up, frontporchforensics.com or Front Porch Forensics will pop up on those players. You can check us out. Go back, look it over some of our old videos, old episodes. Some with videos, some with not. As we grow into this, I want to get some better cameras and do videos much more often. Give you a little insight to our front porch and all our decorations, which is just a very, very, very minor amount. But yeah, check us out. Go find us, Front Porch Forensics, on every podcast catcher out there. Also, take a look at klrnradio.com and follow them on X as well at KLRN Radio. Again, running across the bottom of the screen, you can see it. But check them out on klrnradio.com. There is a plethora of shows out there that you can find. And if this show isn't your speed, that's fine. Like us anyway. If it is, cool. Come back, see us, join us next week. But check klrnradio.com. Find a show that you like. There's political stuff. There's religious shows. There's this show. There's some sci-fi shows. I'm telling you, you will find something, probably more than one, that you'd love. So check them out. So, family, I guess this is it. So till next time, y'all keep your front porch light burning and don't do anything that will make you the subject of the next episode of Front Porch Forensics. So thanks for hanging out with me tonight. Have fun for the rest of your evening. Get your drink that you like. Get you a cigar if you want it. Kick back. Have a good evening. Thanks for joining me. But remember, don't do anything stupid. Don't do anything get yourself caught. And if you do, be smart about it. All right?
I listen to a lot of true crime. I listen to it. I like the girl talk. It makes me feel alright. I like scary stories in the morning. And I like them at night. I like the girl talk vibes. They make me feel just fine. I listen to a lot of true crime.